She didn't cry. That was the first thing she noticed, standing in the corridor outside her husband's office, with her hands wrapped around a warm container of chicken and rice that she'd woken up at 5 in the morning to make. She didn't shake. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, her back against the wall, one hand pressed flat against the cool surface, and understood with a completeness she hadn't expected that she finally had her answer. Not heartbreak, not rage. Relief. If you've ever poured yourself into someone who stopped noticing, this story is going to find you somewhere real. Stay with us until the end. Subscribe to Hidden Desire Stories so you never miss what we share here, and drop a like. Then comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The Tuesday ritual had started 2 years ago, give or take a week. It hadn't been calculated. It hadn't been a gesture. It had been dinner, just dinner. Because Rafe had mentioned in passing, the way he mentioned most things he considered minor, that he hadn't eaten since the morning before. He'd said it the same way he'd say the weather was turning. Flat. Informational. Not a complaint, not an invitation. Della had gone home, cooked, driven 25 minutes through downtown Boston traffic with a container of chicken and rice and a roll wrapped in foil because she knew he skipped bread on principle and she wanted him to at least have the option. She'd talked her way past 2 men at the entrance of a building that officially belonged to a private equity firm and unofficially was the operational center of everything Rafe Calloway ran. She was 36. She owned a small cafe in Charlestown that smelled like cardamom and warm wood and had 6 tables and a counter she had refinished herself the summer she opened it. She had a 7-year-old daughter named Edie who slept with 2 stuffed animals and already read at a 4th grade level and had opinions about everything, especially pasta shapes. She was not a woman who ran after anything. She just knew that Rafe hadn't eaten, and she knew how to cook, and that had seemed like a straightforward equation at the time. He had come down to the lobby himself that first night. She hadn't expected that. He was not a man who came down for things. The world arranged itself around Rafe Calloway's schedule, his preferences, his silences. But he had come down, still in his jacket, tie loose, and he had looked at the container she was holding, and then at her, and something shifted in the set of his face, just briefly, just barely, and he said, "You didn't have to do this." "You didn't eat?" she said. "I'm fine." "You said that last week, too." He took the container, and the following Tuesday, without anyone planning it, she came back. Edie used to draw pictures for him. She'd sit in the lobby on a bench near the door and make something, usually animals, occasionally their apartment, and for a stretch of about 6 months, pictures of their family. Della at the stove, Edie at her desk, and Rafe at the far right edge of the page, slightly smaller than the others. Della would bring those drawings in a small envelope with his name on it, and she'd watched him open one once. He'd looked at it for 3 seconds, said, "She's got talent," and set it on the corner of his desk. The next time she came, it was still there, underneath a phone and 2 folders. Edie had stopped making the drawings 8 months ago, not because anyone told her to. She'd simply stopped asking, "Can I draw something for Daddy?" And Della had noticed the absence of that question the way you notice when a sound you've gotten used to disappears. The house felt slightly different without it, slightly quieter. The visits had gotten shorter too. An hour had become 40 minutes, 40 had become 20. Some Tuesdays she sat in the lobby, and Lori, Rafe's assistant, a composed woman who had the careful eyes of someone who noticed everything and chose what to show, would come downstairs and say very quietly, "He's running long." He said to apologize. And Della would leave the container at the front desk and drive home and eat the same dinner she'd made for him, alone at the kitchen table, while Edie did her homework across from her. She had stopped mentioning it. That was the part she would return to later. She had stopped, and Della did not stop. She was a woman who said things directly, who believed that silence was only useful in the kitchen and in emergencies, who had once told a woman at a neighborhood meeting, diplomatically, but without apology, that keeping the peace was not the same as solving the problem. But with Rafe, she had gone quiet, Not from fear, from something more exhausting than fear. The slow, creeping understanding that saying the words out loud would only confirm what she had been holding in deliberate uncertainty for 18 months. That she was, in some way she had no adequate language for, optional. The Tuesday she heard it was not special. She hadn't built it up. She'd cooked the same dish, chicken and rice, a little lemon, the herbs he liked, wrapped it carefully, driven the familiar route, nodded at Gus at the door, sat in the lobby with the container warm in her lap. After an hour and 15 minutes, she needed to use the restroom. Lori pointed her down the second-floor hallway. She was on her way back when she heard the voices, a door half open. She recognized Trent's voice first, Rafe's head of security, a quiet man with a military background and the permanent composure of someone always running calculations. He was saying something about a problem with the Providence arrangement. Then Rafe's voice, low, unhurried, the voice he used when he wasn't explaining so much as simply declaring the shape of reality. "She's still down there?" Trent said. "Apparently. Papers. Tell Lori to apologize. Let her know I'll be another hour at least. She's been waiting since 2. She'll wait, flat then. She always does." A brief silence from Trent. Then a third voice, someone Della didn't recognize, said, "Devoted woman." And Rafe said, without hesitation, without looking up, "Patient. Not the same thing. A beat. Honestly, if she stopped showing up, I don't think I'd notice for a week." Della stood in the hallway with her hand still resting against the wall. She thought about the chicken and rice she'd made at 5 in the morning. She thought about the drive. She thought about the hour and 15 minutes in the lobby and the 2 years of Tuesdays and the drawings Edie had stopped making. She thought about the question she had been refusing to ask herself for 18 months and how completely, how cleanly she no longer needed to ask it. She turned around and walked back down the hall and down the stairs and through the lobby and set the container on Lori's desk. Lori looked up with those careful eyes and started to say something. "Make sure he eats," Della said. She meant it, genuinely and without irony, which was, she would think later, somehow the most honest thing about who she'd always been. She walked past Gus, who started to speak and didn't, because something in her expression made conversation feel beside the point. She pushed through the front door. The November air hit her face. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathed. Then she walked to her car and drove north. The apartment above the cafe had been storage space when she bought the building 6 years ago. For the past 3 months, she had been quietly clearing it out, box by box, on the days she opened early. She'd had the floors refinished in September. Painted Edie's room yellow, because yellow was Edie's current favorite, and that could change, but it would change for reasons Edie chose. She hadn't told anyone, not because she feared what Rafe would do. She knew him well enough to know he wouldn't do anything dramatic. He'd wait, gather information, manage the situation. She hadn't told anyone because there was no one in the architecture of their shared life who was actually hers in the way she needed right now. The friends, the dinners, the evenings, all of it had always been more his than theirs. She had 1 box of things already upstairs. Edie's spare stuffed animals, her grandmother's recipe cards in a wooden box that smelled of cinnamon and age, a photograph of Della at 28 standing outside the cafe on the day she opened it, laughing at something her mother had said off camera. She didn't look like a woman in flight. She looked like a woman who had remembered where she left something important. She picked Edie up from aftercare at 4:30. Edie climbed into the back seat and said immediately, "Did you bring home the sourdough? We're staying at the cafe for a little while." Edie looked at her in the rearview mirror, processed. Like a sleepover? Like a while. Edie considered this with the seriousness of a 7-year-old who understood that some questions would be answered and others were for later. "Is my purple blanket there?" "It will be tonight." "Okay," Edie said and looked out the window. Rafe got home at 11:15 that night. He set his keys on the hall table, loosened his tie, moved through the house toward his office the way he always did, and noticed nothing. He assumed Della and Edie were at her mother's in Quincy. She did that sometimes a few days, gave Edie time with her grandmother. He didn't text to check. He made himself a drink, dealt with 3 calls he'd been deferring, and was asleep by 1. It was Edie who broke it. 4 days in, she called him from Della's phone. She'd asked if she could, and Della had handed it over without comment. Daddy. Hey, Bug. He was at his desk, distracted, pulling something up on his screen. How's Grandma's? A pause on her end. Small and particular, the pause of a child recalibrating. We're not at Grandma's, Edie said. We're at the cafe. Mama says we live here now. Another pause. When are you coming? Rafe went still. Where's your mom? He said. She's downstairs, Daddy. Edie's voice had the specific gravity of a 7-year-old who has decided something is important. Are you coming? He said he'd call her back. He sat at the desk for a long time after the call ended, looking at his phone. The house was very quiet. He had not, until that moment, noticed how quiet. Trent appeared the next morning without being summoned. He stood in the doorway, hands loose at his sides, expression carrying nothing but the facts. The cafe building in Charlestown, he said. 3rd floor. She moved in a week ago. Edie's with her. A pause. She's been running the cafe herself, opening at 6, staying until close. She's been planning this for at least 2 months. Rafe looked at him. You knew. Not until day 3. I did a trace when she wasn't answering. Trent didn't look away. She didn't hide it. Her name, her building, her accounts. She wanted a clean exit, not an invisible one. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? Trent was quiet for a moment, not evasion, precision. Because I was in the building when you said what you said, and I thought maybe you needed to sit with the silence first, before I handed you information you'd use to manage the situation. He didn't say go fix it. He didn't say go get her back. He said manage, and the word landed in the room and stayed there, accurate and uncomfortable. She hasn't filed anything, Trent added. No lawyer contact. She just left. Get out, Rafe said. Quiet, no heat. He found out about the lease on his own, going through documents he hadn't read in months. Della's cafe was in a building she owned outright, bought before they married. But a development group had purchased the lot immediately to the north 4 months ago. He knew the group. He knew what they did to corners they acquired. The zoning variance they'd applied for would, if approved, make Della's building effectively untenable within 18 months. The variance was denied 6 days later. The development group withdrew from the lot shortly after. The resolution looked like bureaucratic delay from the outside. It was something else entirely. Della received updated documentation from her property attorney. She read it twice, standing behind the counter in the 20 minutes before she opened. She thought about the specific figures referenced, too precise to be coincidence, and understood. She folded the letter and put it in her apron pocket and didn't say anything to anyone. She stood at the counter for a moment after that, looking at the door. He started coming in on Tuesdays. The first time, she was in the back doing inventory, and one of her part-time staff mentioned casually that a man at the corner table had ordered the same black coffee 3 times and was still there an hour later. She knew before she looked. He was in a jacket no one would recognize, no phone on the table, just sitting, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, quietly, completely. She brought the coffee herself the 4th time, set it down in front of him without a word. He looked up. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. You're not here for the coffee, Della said. The coffee is actually very good. Rafe. He wrapped both hands around the mug, looked at it, then at her. I know what I said, he said. I need you to know that I know. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Tell me what you heard, she said. He repeated it exactly, word for word. He didn't soften it, didn't reframe it. Patient. Not the same thing. If she stopped showing up, I don't think I'd notice for a week. She sat with the full weight of the words delivered in his own voice, without the muffling of a half-open door. That's the part, she said, not that you thought it, that you've been thinking it long enough that it came out like weather, like a fact about a Tuesday. She looked at him directly. I've been cooking dinner for 2 years, and at some point it stopped being something you were glad for and started being something that was just there. The way the lights are there. The way I was just there. Her voice didn't waver. You stopped noticing, Rafe. Not all at once, just one Tuesday at a time. He said nothing. Edie stopped drawing pictures for you 8 months ago. She didn't make a scene about it. She just stopped asking. She's 7 years old, and she had already learned that the gesture wasn't landing, so she stopped making it. Della kept her voice level. That's not something a child should have to learn about her own father. Something moved across his face, quick and undefended, there and gone before he could contain it. What are you here for? She asked. Not a trap, an actual question. He thought about it for a real moment. I don't know how to put it into language that doesn't sound like a strategy. So I'm trying to do things instead. The lease? I know about the lease. He nodded. That wasn't for me, she said. It was for the cafe. I know the difference. She studied him. He had always been very good at reading rooms. What she was trying to determine, sitting across from him in the place she'd built with her own hands, was whether he was finally trying to read the right one. You don't get to come back to what we were, she said. That's not available anymore. Too much of it was comfortable in the wrong ways. I know. But I haven't filed anything, she said. He went still. She reached into her apron pocket and set a folded envelope on the table between them. He looked at it but didn't reach for it. It's been 6 weeks, she said. My attorney keeps asking. I keep saying I need more time. She paused. I told myself I was waiting to feel certain. I think I was actually waiting to see whether it was real, whether it would hold when there was nothing holding it in place, no grand gesture, no moment that made a good story. She looked at him. Anyone can change for a month. The whole point is who you are when the month becomes 6 months, and 6 months becomes the rest of it. He didn't argue, didn't promise, didn't reach for the envelope. I watched you from upstairs, she said, quieter now, the first 3 Tuesdays. You sat in the same corner, you ordered coffee, and you watched this room like you were learning it. Not managing it, learning it. She paused. You've never done that with a room you weren't trying to control. A long silence. If you come back, she said, it isn't because I'm patient. I am done being patient in the way that looks like waiting. If you come back, it's because you keep showing up and meaning it even when there's nothing in it for you. Even on the Tuesdays when Edie is difficult and the cafe had a hard week, and I'm not easy to be around. She held his gaze, not because of the lease, not because of the corner table, because you finally understand that being there isn't a favor, it's the whole of it. He reached across the table slowly and picked up the envelope. He held it without opening it. I'm not signing anything, he said. Not contesting, not counterfiling. Just not signing. He looked at her. I don't know if that's enough. I know it isn't enough on its own, but it's what I have right now that's honest. She nodded once. She stood up, picked up the empty coffee mug. Come back Thursday, she said. Edie gets out of school at 3:15. She likes to do her homework here. She went back behind the counter. She didn't watch him leave. The following Thursday, he was at the door at 3:14. He had a paper bag from a bakery 3 blocks away, not her cafe, not her pastries. He had stood in front of her display case that morning for a full 2 minutes and realized he didn't know what Edie liked. He had never paid close enough attention to know. The other bakery had an orange muffin and a chocolate one, and he'd gotten both because he wasn't going to guess. Edie came through the door at 3:20 with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her hair half out of its braid, and she stopped when she saw him. You're here, she said, not surprised, not accusing, just noting it. The way a 7-year-old notes something that has happened for the first time and is still deciding what it means. I'm here, he said. She climbed up onto the stool next to him. She accepted the chocolate muffin without comment, the right choice, as it happened, unzipped her backpack, and took out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the counter in front of him without ceremony. It was a drawing, Della, small and upright, behind a counter. Edie at a table with an open book, and on the right side of the page, larger than the others this time, closer to the center, a figure with dark hair sitting at a table with a coffee cup. Underneath, in careful second-grade letters, "Dad is here." Rafe looked at the drawing for a long moment. Della, behind the counter, didn't say anything. She picked up a cloth and wiped down the espresso machine, which didn't need wiping, and kept her back to them both. But she was smiling, not at him, not yet, just at the sound of Edie's voice explaining very seriously that she'd had to redo the hair twice because it wasn't coming out right the first time. Just at that. Just at the ordinary, costly, quietly radical fact of a Thursday that had turned into something worth staying for.